Yeah, I don't know. But here it goes. Still got the dope intro music. A couple ideas scribbled out in the phone notes. And I'm going to kind of chat about consequences versus mistakes and learning. Also just change. I've just been listening to people. There's a lot going on in my friends' lives, loved ones' lives. Big changes. New kids, job changes, moving. And, man, you just realize that change is just hard until it's not. You know, I think in a lot of cases, especially if it's something that changes out of a routine that's been there for a long time, it just doesn't feel good until it does. And that's okay. It's just, I think it's kind of how we're built. You know, there's so many unknowns in the world. When we feel like we have something that's a little bit known, it's damn comfortable to us. I know I've talked about this a lot, but over the last couple of weeks, it's popped up a bunch of times. You know, I've had some friends get new jobs, move away. Navigating that friendship is new. And I'm definitely someone who I feel like I enjoy change, and I like that things change. And maybe even sometimes I probably embrace it a little too much, like, you know, oh yeah, things always change. It's okay that it changes. And in that sense, like I do a pretty terrible job of, grieving the good that I've enjoyed up until the point things changed. You know, I definitely have talked about this with respect to my competing in the CrossFit Games. And there have been other places for sure. Well, actually, it's funny. One of the things, I talked about this a long time ago, and I've done it intermittently, but every time I do it, I really enjoy it. So I've never developed the consistent habit of journaling. Like I'll just write stuff down and take notes and get stuff out of my head, which I really enjoy. I encourage everybody to do it, especially if you're someone who internalizes a lot of stuff or doesn't share a lot with other people. It's good to, even if you just, write it down, then recite it out loud. I always think it's really important because it helps you sort through the crazy shit and also the stuff that makes sense. But have not really developed the habit of journaling. This podcast, I think, has filled some of that. And one of the things, though, I've wanted to do for various reasons, but I also delete a ton of pictures and stuff like that. I was looking at somebody's phone that had 3,000 pictures on there. And I probably have like 3,000 pictures in total from all like the photos I've taken and stuff like that. But I like delete photos out of my phone constantly if they don't look good. My buddy Max always jokes like, what are you doing taking pictures of fireworks? Like, you ever going to look at that again? Like the videos people take at concerts. Maybe they do. I mean, this is like part of my not grieving well. They look back at it with a nice bit of appreciation and nostalgia. Anyway, journaling, not my strong suit, but one of the things I've been doing is I was kind of lamenting that I haven't done it, and I would like to catch up on things in the past, but I've been going back and looking at photos, from years back, and when one photo maybe strikes a strong memory, I write a journal entry about it. And this has been a really cool exercise because as time goes on, your memory is not carbon copied for sure. And you create little narratives around memories, or you just forget about them altogether. And sometimes when you see a photo and are forced to like rethink through that memory, there's a little corrective exercise there. Rights the ship a little bit, but it's also just in a lot of ways it's really enjoyable to work through remembering something. And I think that's really cool. I don't even remember where I was going to go with this. Originally, it was about the grieving piece. Consequences, mistakes versus learning. Yes, change. So just experiencing seeing a lot of change. Everything is always changing around you, but it's like the big life milestones, are things I'm noticing. Multiple friends getting new jobs, and I was talking to someone recently who's thinking about leaving their current job and going to a new job, and we were just talking about so many things. And, as they got closer and closer and closer to the point of making the choice to leave their current job, they weren't getting cold feet. They were definitely headed toward leaving, but you could see it start to bubble up to the top that they were really becoming uncomfortable with the decision, even though the decision to take a new job was like better in a lot of ways. It was better pay. It was a much better work environment. The substantive work was much more interesting to them. They were going to have a bigger impact on what they were working on. And, when early on we were kind of chatting with them going through this process and different pieces of advice, it was like, have you gathered all the information you can to make this decision? For example, it's like of the things that you would need to know in order to make the decision, can you find answers to those questions? I think it's a really good thing to ask yourself when you're faced with a pretty big decision. So given, the things that you'd want to know in order to make the decision, can you know those things? If yes, have you figured all those out? If no, if you haven't, then you have to make the decision based off what you can know. You can't make the decision based off what you can't know. And that's something I think is really holds us back from a lot of choices. Like, if only I knew this, if only I knew what the boss was going to be like, if only I knew what the, day-to-day work environment was going to be like. It's like, well, you didn't know that when you took this job, and you won't know that for the next one. So at some point you just have to like push forward and make a choice. And I do hear people say a lot like, well, I just, I don't have to suffer the consequences. And I was thinking about this a lot, and I've always felt like there are always consequences. And I think sometimes consequence has like a really, a little bit of negative baggage with it. And so, as I usually like to do, I looked it up in the old dictionary. Like, what does the old dictionary say? It says just consequences are a result of an action or condition. Well, it also can mean like importance and relevance, like this is of no consequence or great consequence, something like that. And I think where people really focus on in terms of the consequence definition is, you accept responsibility for the negative results of one's own actions. And this makes a lot of sense, bear the weight of your consequences, or bear the weight of consequences. I think this one makes a lot of sense, but if I was to reframe this and, try and wrap my head around going forward, making choices, taking chances, doing the next thing, next best thing, who knows, I would probably reframe this and say something like, just accepting responsibility and learning from the results of one's actions. And you can't avoid consequences. Like, you're always going to have some result effect of an action or condition. And, I've met a lot of people in my life, and I've admired their ability to say, hey, I know there are going to be consequences, but we're going to move forward and we'll deal with those later. Or even people who have had really good foresight into what those consequences might be and say, okay, I'm going to accept those and we'll get to them. But I think if, you find yourself being like, I just want to avoid these consequences, or I don't know what the consequences are, well, just know that there are going to be some. And then from there, it gets us to this discussion about like, well, I don't want to make another mistake. And that's another thing I hear with a lot of these big life choices is like, taking a new job, or I don't know, maybe it's not something that big. Maybe it's something like making a large purchase, first world problem. But it is funny how that kind of stuff can paralyze us. I get wrapped around the axle about that stuff. It was so funny. I wanted to buy a new weed whacker, weed trimmer. And of course there's a billion options, different brands, and then different models in the brand. And the other day I was in the store, kind of had narrowed it down between two. And for some odd reason, over the last, when it comes to buying things, over the last year, these kind of choices like stop me in my tracks. And I know I'm like griping about a problem, like, oh, James, poor you have to spend your fucking money. Totally agree. When I sit here in a nice calm state of mind, rationally, I'm like, yep, being a baby. I saw that. Anyway, sorry, I don't want to get off track. But for some reason, like, feelings aren't facts, but man, is it a feeling that washes over me, and it makes me want to puke. Anyway, I'm in the store, and the other model I wanted to look at, one model I was looking at was there in the display, and the other one I was looking at, there was a tag for it, but it wasn't out, and so I go grab the fellow over at Ace Hardware. His name is David. Fantastic guy. Older fellow, just, great country accent. He's fantastic. And I said, hey, do you got this model? And he goes, well, I have to go look in the back. And I said, okay. And he goes and checks. And he comes back and he goes, well, these things come packed in packages of 2, so I got to take it apart. I said, okay. I said, well, before you do that, and then Cassandra was there. I said, Cassandra, should I just get this one that's here? And he goes, and he just looks at me and he goes, well, just get the one you want. And I was like, okay, go on, wrap that other package. It's nice when somebody just gives you a little push, I don't believe too much in the the woo-woo-ness of all that, but like him being there at that time, being like, well, if this other one is the one you want, and all I got to go do is take it out of the other, separate it from the other package, and let's just do that one. It kind of gave me so much clarity in the moment. And it was just a reminder of like, all I have to do is pick the one that I want. And I say this to Cassandra a lot when we talk about different decisions in life. And I'm like, well, what do you want to do? And it's easy because, someone says that and you start to get spiraled into like, well, here's what I could do. Here's what, if I do that, here's what these things mean. Here's, all of this other stuff. And I try really hard to focus on like, well, what is it that I want to do? And that might seem really selfish, but I only think it starts to become selfish in terms of interaction or outcome. You could definitely want to do things that I think are not, maybe that modus operandi is selfish, but the outcome might not be selfish anyway. But I do hear a lot of people talk about this kind of stuff. Like, I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to buy the wrong one. I don't want to take the wrong job. I don't want to take the wrong way there. And again, I think, and I've talked about this a lot too, is like when you're younger, I think it's one of my favorite things about like the memories of being young, or even, like talking to kids who are less jaded and programmed by the repetition that life starts to develop. They don't really think about all those things. And obviously there's some dangers to that, but there's also like this really wild, immense amount of freedom. And I think enjoyment, at least for me, enjoyment in that. And because the truth is, it's like, it's only a mistake if you handle it a certain way. Like there's not much you can do in life there's a couple things, but there's not much you can do in life that's irrevocable. It's, most of the things we've talked about this before, most of the things are a two-way door. So when it comes to consequences, they're going to happen anyway. Like that is the point of making a choice and taking an action, is because there needs to be consequence. There will be consequences, and consequences aren't bad. They're just the effects. Your outlook on them, that might make them bad or good. And in terms of mistakes that might come in the form of consequences, it's only a mistake if you stop right there. Because in my head, I'm like, what if I buy the wrong one? And I'm like, what's a fucking weed whacker? Like this one or the other one, they're kind of both going to do the same thing. And in about 4 hours of me using it, I'm going to forget. And if it really is, not the one I want, I can correct that for sure. But I the more I get into this and think about these things, the more I just realize how it's the paralysis that is the greatest enemy. And there's just so much province in action, and also province in saying, well, I'm going to take this choice, and if it does go south, I'm going to learn from it and I'm going to do better next time. Being somebody who can do that, like I don't think that's something we can talk about enough, because I just see it's like one of the greatest struggles for me, for my friends around me, for my loved ones making big choices. I see it in where I work on a daily basis, and it's slowly and pernicious, like a creeping mold, infects everybody. Just this fear of making a mistake. And it's like, well, if you don't learn from it, sure. If all you do is you stop at the consequence, could be, very much could be a mistake. But if you're going to learn from it, if you're going to get up, do better next time, it's not a mistake, man. It for sure is it's a learning opportunity. It's a point of growth. And, you just waste so much damn time going back and forth. Get to that point where, ask yourself that question of, what is the information I would need to know to make this choice? Great. Is it information that I could know? And if your answer to that question The answer is it information that I could even know? Is no. Well, then you have to make the choice based off the information you have, and you just got to move forward. You just got to move forward. So that's kind of where I was at with that one. We can't avoid consequences. We can avoid mistakes depending on what we do next. So kind of all over the map, but back to it. Going to get out the Fitness Friday podcast next a little early. Got a bunch of stuff coming up. So happy to get back on here, chatting, rapping a little bit. Got some more notes to get through. So appreciate y'all, and talk to you soon.